Welcome, and thank you for joining us for another live episode of Teachers for Teachers. I'm Dr. Dejana, and again, I'm here with Dr. Leah. Hello.
Hello, Dr. Dejana. Really good to see you.
So excited for today's show. Leah, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we have to look forward to today?
Well, Scott Blough is a clerk with the Simi Valley School District, Unified School District, and he is on the Finance Committee. So I think today is an opportunity for us to take a look at what has worked and not worked during the pandemic from a board's perspective, from a board member perspective, and then, what kind of optimism can we instill in the view of what's coming next? You want to join us, Scott? Say hi to the audience, and the camera will come.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, welcome and thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it. I know we've stayed in touch. I've followed Two Bit Circus and many of the things that you guys are doing for many years. So it was great to connect and be invited to speak or to talk and interview.
Yeah, thank you.
I've served on the school district for like seven years now. I'm headed into my end of my second term. Our district started out, we had many challenges in changing our district and going through a big change in how we wanted to educate our community, from moving towards sort of the testing models and the approach of rote curriculum and those types of things to more of a PBL and more open learning and those types of things. And that was an ongoing process. That's a big change. And that has been ongoing, but obviously the pandemic and so forth has been, kind of a slowdown in a lot of the initiatives I think that we were working on. One big initiative that I'm just off the top of my head, we presented at the California School Boards Association last year, or I guess it was 2 years ago now. But it was on social emotional learning. We had a big program where we were connecting to kids at a very emotionally connected level in order to solve different issues that they might be having to grow their learning and their achievement. And we had just kicked that off in the past year. And of course, with COVID, the toughest thing you can do in education is go distance, because everything in education is, you're very close together and you have relationships, and then the distance learning and all the hiccups with the Wi-Fi networks. And I became an IT administrator, I think, as a board member. As a parent, I had 3 kids at home, and I was also doing my job, my day job on top of the board work. So I was personally in it very, very much. So
You have a story very similar to Dr. Dejana, because she's teaching full time in the classroom and has 3 children at home that she's teaching. Dejana, do you want to introduce the rest of our panel?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're going to have a really good discussion. I heard a lot of cool things that Scott just said, and it's always refreshing to have a board perspective. I heard PBL, project-based learning, SEL, social emotional learning. I think we're going to have a really interesting time here. So let me go ahead and introduce the panel. We're so happy to have some of our regular panelists. Welcome, Tim Griffin. Hello, Tim.
Hey, it's so good to see you guys.
Tim is a regular with us. He's a retired STEM teacher and an award-winning singer, songwriter, and storyteller. The founding director of Griffin Ed, a nonprofit team of educators and musicians dedicated to raising academic achievement in STEM through fun educational music. We're so happy to have Tim come to be a part of our conversation. Also welcoming back Dr. Mark Riddle. Hello, Mark.
Hey, it's so good to be here and see you folks again.
Absolutely. Mark has degrees in music, theology, and sociology, and works at West Coast University. Mark is a local for me because he lives here in Los Angeles. All right, so there's our team. I think this is going to be pretty cool. I'm going to throw it back to you, Leah, to start us off with some cool questions.
Right. Well, first of all, because there were a lot of things that you said that I do want to dive into, the social emotional learning and where you'll pick that up. But even before that, I want to just see, what was it that moved you from graduate degrees in finance and politics to education? What was the path there for you, Scott?
That's a great question. And that's a great question. So I started out, I'm actually a product of the Simi Valley schools. So I grew up in the school. My mother was a teacher. She was a home economics teacher when they had home economics. And so every summer I'd be going and helping setting up rooms and doing all the work when the air conditioning wasn't on in the school to get ready for school. So I kind of grew up in the school system. But as I went through high school and then into college, I started progressing. I became very interested in education. At that time, No Child Left Behind was just coming onto the scene, but California had been in this sort of testing movement for about, I want to say 6 years before that. So a lot of the things that I grew up with wood shop and all of the vocational components to education really started just declining from just focus after that period. And that includes music, that includes many of the very fine arts and many of the other items that I grew up with and I had. And in fact, I wasn't part of the testing situation. So when I came back and decided to run for board, the testing components were actually very new to me as a student, all the high stakes testing and so forth. So I got involved in 2004. I helped a businessman run for school board. He didn't win, and I stayed in touch. I got involved in the bond oversight committee in our community to do the bond work. And then I helped a whole bunch of other people get involved in the board, and eventually I was elected in 2014, and I've just been very interested in helping kids achieve their direction, whether that's moving on to college or finding a career. There's many careers that don't require a college education, and we have a college, they call it college and career, which is pretty normal language these days. But we want kids to have a good blend of both opportunities. So that's pretty much it. And in fact, one of the other areas that we've been noted for in Simi Valley Unified School District is equal opportunity schools. I don't know if you've heard of equal opportunity schools, but we had a group come in. We also presented on California School Board Association about this. And what it is it's a program. They came in and they evaluated our high school programs. And they found out that our AP programs were very rigid, meaning students couldn't get in. They had to have all these prerequisites. They had to have all these layers to get into advanced placement. And so what we did was we opened up the doors to any student of any socioeconomic background, anything, and they helped us do this. So more students were taking AP programs. What we found is that the rigor of the program didn't go down at all. Students, and we had more students passing and getting passing rates. So it didn't have any impact on the actual program, that everybody's fearful of, about the program being, is it being diluted or any of those things. Giving more opportunity to more people actually led to higher scores and higher advancement, and so many other kids had chances to even advance into college and move into that. So we've just been doing a lot of, again, this is pre-COVID, we're still doing this, but we've just been involved in a lot of shifts in our district. I'm really proud of our schools.
Yeah, that change just opened the door to students who maybe their education didn't spark in them until a bit later. Because if you don't have all of the appropriate prerequisites, it's pretty hard to jump in.
Yeah, and we also added an Air Force ROTC program at one of our high schools. And this was a huge differentiator for kids. We had students that entered this ROTC program, and they got to know, and they led, and they got to do all the passing reviews and all the competitions with all the other ROTC programs. And we had a student that went on, and I think she went on to Yale. So this is a student that wasn't really what they would classify as track. I know that's an unpopular thing, but just the fact that we're connecting kids in different ways to education, I think, is leading toward different results. And I've seen that over and over again while I've been on the board. Just giving that opportunity and finding that linkage into the school system. If you can engage a student, they can go anywhere, and that's things that I'm very proud of in the district. Is my time of service. So, but thank you. Yeah. I don't know. You want me to continue, or?
I was going to say that's beautiful. It's some of the programs that you talked about. They speak to equity and social justice in education. And during the time of COVID-19, it's really brought to light some of the issues in the education system that we should be addressing in terms of equity and access and just that connectivity piece. And it's cool to hear that some of your work on the board, was in the right direction before we were even experiencing this pandemic. So,
Correct.
other districts and teachers can look to that as a potential model
Hmm.
on how to move forward. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing.
Great. Yeah. Our superintendent, Dr. Poplinski, he spent a lot of time. Actually, he went to Finland and got involved in their education program. And if you know the Finnish system, it's not like obviously the U.S. system, but one of the things we would talk about all the time is the focus in Finland is on equity, and through equity, creating those baselines and those connectivity, they're finding student achievement goes higher, and they're having more gains than just kind of focusing in on this certain type of group or this, these kids or parents that are really active, all those other kind of measurements that kind of break out in a school system. So we've been focused on equity, and that's led to bigger gains, which kind of might be counterintuitive to some people's beliefs, but our district's really shifted in that direction, and continues to shift in that direction and have those conversations.
That's cool. I have a question that I just think our viewers might want to know because I didn't even know this
Uh-huh.
like maybe a couple of years ago.
Uh-huh.
What is the role of the board of trustees? And as a parent, as
Yeah.
a teacher, as just a person in education, I think it would be great for you to share with our viewers, like, what does that look like, and what are some of the goals of that board when it comes to a district at a
Mhm.
district level?
Oh no, that's a great question because there's a lot of different assumptions. When I first ran, a lot of people said, "So you're like a super principal, right?" Because that's how people knew their school. So you're like a principal of every district, And frankly, the one thing I always say, I'll go visit a campus, and a parent or a student will say, "Well, you're the boss of my teacher, or you're the boss of so." And I said, "I only have one employee." And I said, and frankly, your teacher's my boss. So, that's there are many of the bosses that run around here, and your parents are bosses. The ultimate boss is the public. And the role of the board is to ensure that we are advancing public education in our district, and we're helping students achieve whatever direction they are. We're raising achievement. That should be the number one. The number one of any board is to raise the achievement of kids. And oftentimes there's different stakeholders in that. And so part of the board is maneuvering within a very stakeholder, fractious situation and finding solutions that often will benefit kids. So that's more the down and dirty way to say. But I have one employee, and that's the superintendent. And how we generally break this down, and I hope I'm not rambling one way or the other, but we are the what. So we say we want this, and we have to come up with some sort of majority to get there. And the superintendent is the how. So they figure out how they're going to accomplish it. So that's really the breakdown. And our superintendent and I will usually always get in conversations. And it's really easy for a board member to go over the line into the other lane. And it's really easy for the superintendent to go into what would be considered a board lane and be more into the public face. And it happens both ways. And so at times there's always those discussions as to, well, I think I'm out of my lane. And this often happens if there's hiring questions or different, this person's moving into this role. Oftentimes I'll state my opinion, but I say, but you pick your team. So that's not my role as a board member to do the hiring and those things. So we'll have those kind of conversations. So board governance is really difficult for the public to understand, not because the public is doesn't get it or they'll never get it. It's just we look like an appendage, but we're not really an appendage. We're really the oversight of the board, and we are responsible to the public. So it's a school board in a lot of ways. Historically, it was kind of this old Wilsonian, and I mean like Woodrow Wilson approach to bureaucracy, where we had a democratic group overseeing the bureaucracy. And so there's always going to be the friction between the two, between the experts and the expertise, and then the public's demands and needs and wants. And those two things are always going to have some friction. And so board governance is so important, and having good relationships is so important to be able to move forward. So that's a long probably
No,
maybe a school answer. So,
I like it. Thank you. Because, I have students that are interested in, enacting change in education, and they're doing it right now on a student level. And then I get to model it on a teacher level. And sometimes they see it in their administration. But it's nice to just throw it out there. Like, there's many levels in which you can contribute and enact change toward progress in education. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's important information to get out.
It was really well described too, because it does sort of explain who reports to whom and how, and relationships really are, at the end of the day, the most important part of any of it, because without that you can't, not everyone's going to agree on everything. So having relationships that allow you to be back and forth and negotiate in good faith and come up with solutions to situations, that is definitely key.
Especially now, I can't even imagine the different stakeholders and their position on what's happening with schools and opening them and closing them and hybrid. Like, that's going to be really key in navigating that. Sure.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I've heard more and more lately is we need to bring back civics instruction in schools, because things like this matter. What does a school board do? Because if people don't understand what the various elected officials are responsible for and what they can ask them to do and what they shouldn't be asking of them, it's kind of hard for people to vote effectively.
Correct. Correct. And it's even more, the challenge now is our district, as many school districts, are now moving towards what they call these boundaries. So when I was originally elected, it was an at-large election in my community, as it was in many communities around the state. So the whole community would vote for you for a school board. Now, because of different changes that are going on in the state of California and the nation, we are responsible for drawing up different zones, kind of where we live, and then outwards a little bit. So the tensions are actually changing because different groups are more localized, but you're starting to see again a sense of this school needs this priority, and you're the board member from this localized area, as opposed to looking out for the entire district and kind of looking out for all of the things. So you're starting to see that pressure starting to change a little bit. And in particular, my district would have, I haven't run in this new district that's been formed because I was an at-large. So I pretty much knew the whole district when I was started out, but just my district is very different. It has an adult school in it, but then it has a magnet high school that's, is a performing arts high school. And then it would have it has Vista, Elementary, which is a high, very high-end, high-scoring, elementary school. And then I don't have a middle school. So the interests of the boards are going to shift a little bit as we get into these more, cut areas. And I think that might hopefully dovetail back into more discussion of civics, because when you're kind of part of a board and you're overseeing the whole community, maybe there's like we have the Royal Civics program that's connected to Royal High School, or the Ronald Reagan Library. So they work together to have public speakers come in and develop different ways to participate in local government and local issues, writing bills and all of those things. So we do that, but you're right. I think the best thing you can do to enhance civics is to put kids in a position where they're actually involved in a campaign and they're involved in the actual electioneering process. So they're learning, almost simple tasks, not just the call banking or the, what we as elected officials would want them to do, but actually leading, being campaign managers, giving them enough rope to participate in a real way, not just, here's your call bank. One of the things, not to keep going, but one of the things I did very early on was I worked local campaigns on purpose, because I felt like I could always be a campaign manager. I could always do something, as opposed to maybe working in a presidential when, here's your go wave a sign on the corner, if you will, or what. I always wanted to do more kind of more of a responsible thing. So I was always involved in the local side. And that became very nonpartisan in a lot of ways because he started seeing the community for its challenges as opposed to kind of what you hear in the news and all of those types of things. So yeah, it was a different track for sure.
So I'm interested in the social and emotional learning programs that you were starting before the pandemic, and how adaptable is that to what we're facing now? Because it's never been more important than it will be when we bring the kids back in this next round.
Yes, I think that we're going to have a lot of work to do, and I will just speak as a parent for a moment. The challenge is even my kids in a two-person family. One's working outside the household as an essential worker, and I'm working at home, so I'm able to manage. But we have families just in Simi Valley and throughout, but childcare demands. I mean, we've had instances, I've heard horror stories of students having their parents watching them on a camera while they're doing their work on the camera, and there's just going to be a lot of challenges when those doors open. And there's trauma involved in that. And I think, I'm not a psychotherapist or, an expert in that area of thinking, but for kids to be able to achieve, I think that we're going to have to really invest in mental health and a lot of the other resources that maybe states and public governance hasn't really put money towards. They've thought, well, we can get around that with this program, or we can, kind of just focus on achievement and we'll make it. I think you really have to come from a holistic view at this point, and that's going to be a challenge, I think, for some communities to say, when you start talking about spending priorities, that we're putting a lot of money into that, and we're saying that we value those things, because I do think that there's going to be some kids that we're going to see, and they're just going to need a lot of different types of support than schools have typically given, in more ways than one. And it's just, we don't know what's been going on at home in a lot of these cases. You can see it on the camera, or teachers can see it on the camera, but there's a lot of challenges. And I would say it's not just our district, it's, across the country. And I think when kids come back and you start seeing them back into a frame, I think those challenges are going to come forth. I do think kids are resilient, and they will rise to the occasion, just as many of them have over the past year. But we're going to have to give those supports. The districts are going to have to lead on mental health and the supports that kids need to be able to advance. Because it's not just learning loss. It's relationships. It's consistency. It's, food in the cupboard. There's many needs, and they're all different. They're all going to be very different needs based on the child and their experience during this pandemic.
Think about, I've been watching education in California for the last, 150 years or so, and when I hear you talk about, this need for a more holistic approach, an emphasis on social emotional well-being and whatnot, I think of the pendulum that swings both ways, right? And from this holistic approach that takes the student into account, tries to meet their needs, tries to create great citizens who can participate in and then it'll swing right back the other way over a period of a decade roughly to to accountability. We need more testing. We need to know that the teachers are doing what we expect them to do. And my sense is that, in business, what businesses want students to be able to do when they graduate is more the people and holistic stuff, right? Like, taking a test doesn't tell how good a banker somebody's going to be. There are a bunch of other markers that could be. Where do you suppose we are on that pendulum? Do you think you think we're still going to make it past the, past COVID into this more holistic thing where people are taking those responsibilities seriously? Or do you think we're going to start, those teachers have been, on their own online now, God knows what they're doing. We better start testing some more. I think we're going to see it going back and forth in the debate, and that's because
as you know, and you know, because you've been watching for 150 years, the debate continues, and we're seeing that debate play out in just reopening schools and who's supporting one side versus who's supporting the other in terms of who, you know, going back and not, or distance versus non-distance. Right now, I would say the populace itself, you know, in Simi and in other places, as you know, or can, you know, anybody can read a paper, and you know, it's very fractious. I mean, it's a very fractious environment, and one of the areas that I keep going back to as a board member is to say, how do we create the kind of ligaments to reconnect our parent and our teacher communities together to even come up with whether we're going to be sort of moving towards a holistic approach to education, or we're going to be this the high achiever testing accountability side, because we were kind of handling both, and we're a typical, you know, we're in a suburban district, so we were handling it both ways. We did a survey, I think our first year, because we were rebranding the district, and we classified our parent populations into, you know, different themes. There were different themes. There were definitely the high achiever families that were literally just looking at the test scores of the school and making a decision whether their kids were going to go there. And then we had these parents that wanted great citizens, right? And then we had that I want the holistic, and then the last was obviously the job skills, vocational ed. So we had like 4 different nodes. So we developed our policies around those different things, but you can't do everything, and you can't solve everything for all folks. So education's going to be, I want to say I want to be hopeful, and I want to say that it's holistically going to go in this one direction where it's focused on creative skills and developing students into kind of the open-ended part of our society, which is where progress is really going in a lot of ways. You got to be able to handle the ambiguous, which this last year in pandemic was very ambiguous, right? But the other side of me is going, there is a lot of parents, like I think the alternative education approach might actually have lost in a lot of ways during the last year, because people saw what distance learning was, and they might just make the assumption that those are the same thing, right? The alternatives and what you got at home the last year. So I do think that there's going to have to be a distinction between those two for alternative methods of education to kind of go. I mean, if you ever track the math wars between testing math versus open-ended, if you ever follow Dr. Bowler, and she's got the Stanford mathematics and all this, and then even the conflicts that were going on at Stanford when she was developing kind of more of her approach versus the traditional math approach. I mean, that's really where kind of we are as education. We haven't really come to a conclusion on that division yet. So for your another 150 years, you got to work that out. That's the next 150 years.
Oh my gosh, this has been really interesting to hear this part of the conversation. I wonder if it changes based on the generation of the parents and what their values are, and if that just continues to swing every 15 years back and forth, and what causes that. I mean, there's somebody's PhD project right there. I'm just saying. I don't know if they have 150 years to complete that work.
Yeah, most of the time as a board member, you're focused on your fiscal year, and you're just trying to make it to the next meeting before, especially these days, just getting to the next meeting and moving the ball a little bit, because I know in education, we like to think that that's the other thing about the board member, going back to that question. You like to say that you're in control, but in a lot of ways, as a board member now, we have less local control, because public health is ultimately defining many of the things that we're being held accountable for to the public. And then number 2 is the governor, and the California Department of Public Health is coming out with their plans. And then at the federal level, you have, is President Biden going to waive testing? Is, who's our new education secretary? And then the CDC just released a report that contradicts the last report. So that's the life of a board member.
I can't even imagine. I mean, every week the information changes. I just got an update. Well, Tuesday we just got an update here in LA County about our numbers and when we can open and how we might be able to open, but then maybe not, because the governor might change something if he wakes up and decides. There's so much I can't even imagine.
Yeah. I mean, we continue to say that we continue to say we're following the science, but the science is also changing.
Yeah.
And we want the science to be, in its box so that we can kind of imprint ourselves on it and use it in order to do the right thing. But the reality is, the studies early on, remember the studies early on that kids were vectors in the school, and there was a lot of that coming out of East Asia. And then it's kind of evolved that, well, with social distancing and with these things, you can open, but you have to keep 6 feet. You have to be able to do, with controls. That's changed a lot just in the last 9 months. And that's not just because parents wanted to go back. That was just because the science was evolving to figure out how to do that.
Real-time science.
It was real time. Yeah. And education always, go ahead.
Oh, I was just looking at the time, and I know Leah was giving me the little mic, like, oh, can you believe it? Our 30 minutes has expired. Like, no joke. We can talk about this. I'm feeling like it's just starting to get rolling here.
Yeah. It's so interesting to see the education from a different perspective, because most of us see it as parents or teachers. And so, yes, thank you, Scott.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, what can I say? Our half hour is up. I want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much, Mark and Tim, for joining us. And Scott, wow, this was a really cool conversation. I hope you come back so we can hear more from a board perspective, which is really a really important set of lenses to add to this discussion. All right. Well, everybody, I'm Dr. Dejana, and again, I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Leah, and that's a wrap for another episode of Teachers for Teachers. We hope you can join us next time.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.